Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. Today's video is going to be about ZvP unit compositions in Micro, and specifically we're going to be taking a look at the Roach Hydra compositions, Mutalisk compositions, and Swarm Host compositions. And I should kind of make a little note about this video to say that a lot of times fighting Protoss straight up is not always what you want with a lot of these compositions. So these battles are kind of simplified in a lot of ways. But I'll get to those as they come up, and I'm going to be going into the unit test map like we did for the last video, and just walking you guys through some basic battle scenarios as far as what you can expect. One thing you're going to be seeing in most of these fights is that surface area means a lot against Protoss, especially against things like Colossus. So that'll be a recurring theme throughout this. Mainly we're going to be looking at situations in which you should be engaging his army, and situations when you can win those fights. So, obviously some of these situations are pretty hard to micro on both sides. At least now we've got the game going, we can get this started and underway. So, the right side is always going to be the Zerg. I'm just going to grab some upgrades over there. And the first composition we're going to be using is this Roach Hydra composition. You'll notice I have these Vipers out charging up their energy, and we'll be producing Colossus and Stalkers on either side. Like I said, this is really simplified micro because I can't micro for 2 players worth of stuff by myself. You really need 2 players for that to be authentic. But this is just to give you guys a general idea. But the composition that's coming down is a lot of Stalkers, a few Colossus, and the whole idea here is, like I said, you really want surface area. So I'm spreading my units out the best I can. And note that my composition here is about 2 Roaches for every 1 Hydra, because Hydras are really bad against Colossus, and you want the Roaches to be able to tank the damage. The Vipers are really important as well. Another thing to note is they might have Templar supporting this, so you need to be careful about that too. Try to engage at points where his Templar are not. But either way, I'll just grab these armies and we'll just go and kind of simulate what you guys should do in your own fights. So I'm going to grab the entire Zerg army as well as the Protoss is coming in with Guardian Shield. What you want to do is grab your Vipers. You can throw a couple of Blinding Clouds down just to mess them up, but more importantly you want to pull those Colossus into your army so that they will kill the Colossus first. You can target the Colossus yourself, but they will usually auto-target the Colossus if you just pull it right on top of them. And of course, things like Blinding Clouds are really useful, especially against the Stalkers that may be left over after the fight. So be ready to throw stuff like that down. The next composition we're going to be taking a look at is the Skytoss type of composition, and most of the time this is just a lot of Void Rays with things like Zealot and Templar support. So you'll notice that my composition is kind of flopped. There's about 2 Hydras for every 1 Roach this time. And the most important piece to this army, the support, is actually the infestors that I have hanging out here that we'll see in just a second, or that we saw before. Now I know one thing you're going to say is, well, wouldn't my infestors just all get feedback by the Templar? And the whole idea that I want to demonstrate here is that fungal outranges feedback. So what you really want to do is you want to grab this army while it's all clumped up. So try and throw fungals out the best you can and stay out of feedback range if you can. Of course I can't do both at the same time, so this isn't terribly authentic, but I mean, you get the idea here that you really need some fungal damage on this before you can fight. And then we'll show once you have the fungal damage down, you can even just take some storms. If you've put some fungal damage on the Void Rays and you've gotten rid of the Zealots and stuff like that. Of course it is best to try and dodge those storms the best you can, kind of split your way out of it, but even still, a lot of the time you can just take the storms if you've dealt enough damage with the fungals. The last composition you might see when you're running Roach Hydra is something like Immortal Zealot Archon. And this one's going to be a lot different in the sense that the Roach Hydra is going to do a lot of the work. The work is actually going to be done mostly by the Banelings that you'll want to support this with. And the reasoning is that if they have this many Zealots, it's pretty obvious that the Zealots are supposed to be a big part of the composition. So if you can just completely rip the Zealots out of the fight right away and be left over with really high DPS Hydras and some Roaches peppered in. And you'll also notice I should mention that there's only a few Roaches in this army. It's mostly Hydra and a lot of Banelings. This is obviously overkill on Banelings. You wouldn't normally want this many. I just wanted to demonstrate how fast the Zealots would die to something like this. So maybe half of this Baneling count would be more realistic. As long as you can just knock out the Zealots and have the Hydras fighting the rest. So if you watch it come in, the Zealots basically all die just instantly. The rest of those Banelings obviously didn't do anything. But after this, there's really not much you need to do other than make sure you can chase this army down. So try to get on top of it just in case they try to run away so you can still do damage to it. So yeah, it's almost purely just composition in most of these fights and being able to use the 1 or 2 units that's supporting it. The Roach and Hydra are fairly autonomous. The next composition we're going to be taking a look at is Mutalisk compositions. And this one's going to be a little bit weird because a lot of times the whole deal with Mutas is that you don't actually want to fight his army. unless you have a huge army advantage. But we'll show, just in case you have some circumstance where you can fight their army, then here's a couple of tricks that you can do in these types of fights. But yeah, most of the time with Mutalisk, you're going to be trying to attack his probes, his production structures, and stuff like that. You don't really want to take fights with Mutas. So the whole idea with them is that they take a lot of APM to keep busy. So you want to keep them active as much as possible, but keep them alive as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to target down these Colossus so my Zerglings that are supporting will actually do something. So if I just target those down, and then I fight the Stalkers, you can actually pull the Mutalisks away just to assure that the Zerglings are taking the damage and not the Mutas. Then you should be able to clean up these Stalker forces pretty easily with the Zerglings left over. But make sure that you're spending your army efficiently on the stuff that they're supposed to counter. So, for example, the Zerglings will counter the Stalkers, the Mutalisks can kill the Colossus, but if I just ran my Zerglings in and let the Colossus kill him, then I never would have won that fight. So, the second one I'm going to show is that a lot of players will make Phoenix against Mutas, and the idea that you want here is that you want the Mutas engaging the Void Race and the Corruptors engaging the Phoenix. If you can control the fights that way, so that you always get those kind of units attacking each other, and eventually you can pull your Mutas back and just let the Corruptors do the rest of the work once you get a far enough lead. But the whole idea is supporting it against the Sky Army with Corruptors is so that you can kill their Phoenix count. That will be the biggest problem for your Mutas. Lastly, I'm just going to simulate a scenario that they are on really heavy Zealot Archon. So we can see over here, if I just try to engage that straight up with my Muta count, then those Archons will actually win this fight. Especially since Protoss, with this type of composition, will usually have a lot better upgrades than you. So there's a lot of Mutas out, there's a lot of Spines more importantly, and the idea here is that you're going to be trying to base trade against this type of composition because he shouldn't be able to win. But let's assume you're base trading and he comes back to fight your Spines. So if he comes back to fight your Spines, then they can take a lot of the damage and deal a lot of damage to the Archons while you send in the rest of your units from behind and try to just get us around on this army. And then once you do, make sure you don't clump your Mutalisk up too much. Just try to use, fly over the top and use hold position or stop micro and stuff like that to get them stopped so that you can win situations like this. So again, like I said, this is going to be a little weird because most of the time you don't actually want to be fighting this composition. You just kind of want to be doing other things on the map and trying to harass the Protoss to death, especially with Mutalisk. So that was a little weird to try and demonstrate that, but that definitely is a very viable composition. Definitely watch a lot of Sue in the GSL. He's a really good player with that. And as you saw on the screen there, we're going to talk about Swarm Hosts now. The idea with Swarm Hosts is that they are a very immobile composition. So this is kind of a composition that you just hang out with and turtle with for a really long time. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting Swarm Hosts on the ground, as you can see, and I'm supporting them with Spore Crawlers. So that any sort of flying unit or Colossus or whatever that's pulled into there will die to the Spore Crawlers. And speaking from a Protoss perspective, if you have big, expensive gas units dying to Spore Crawlers, that's like the worst possible trades you could ever get. So that's the whole idea here. So the composition for Zerg right now is Swarm Host with some Vipers, but more importantly, they're just sitting over their Spore Crawlers so that they can just pull the Colossus in when they deem it necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'll grab my Swarm Hosts, I'll make sure they're rallied forward so that the Locusts head toward the army. And then when the army starts to attack in here, of course the Locusts will die to Colossus fire, but if you can pull the Colossus into the Spores and into the Locusts so that they can't sit back there and just damage everything as much as they want, then you'll be in good shape. So what I'm going to do is I'll fly forward, I'll just grab some of these Colossus so they're taking damage from the Spores, especially from the Locusts as well. You can continue to pull them back if you have enough Vipers. You can see that if they don't micro their Colossus properly, or even still, that's still a pretty hard situation to manage. All of a sudden it's Stalkers, and you can throw down things like Blinding Clouds on top of the Stalkers. And Stalkers will never ever kill Locusts. So if you actually look at this composition, I think I lost maybe a few Vipers and not even a Swarm Host, of course, since there's no detection with that army, but I mean it would die to the Spore Crawlers anyway. So a lot of advantages there. And then lastly, we're going to take a really brief look at engaging a lot of Tempest. This is kind of the same idea, except for there's less Swarm Hosts and there's a lot of Corruptors in this composition as well. So I'm just going to be pulling the Tempest into the Spore Crawlers and the Corruptors the best I can. And you'll also notice that I do have less Swarm Hosts than normal because the Swarm Host's only job from this point will basically be to zone out things like Templar that can feed back your Vipers and kill your Corruptors. So the Corruptors are basically just going to work on these, and you can see if you get trades like that, you'll be fine. Another thing to note that I demonstrated there was that if you ever pull a unit, it can't fire while it's being pulled. So I just wanted to demonstrate a few general things in ZvP. It's a really complicated matchup, but these these compositions definitely are viable, and it's definitely a matchup that's very much about momentum. So, I mean, if you're behind as Zerg, it's really hard to come back against Protoss. I'm like dropping stuff all over the place. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, definitely leave them down below in the comments. I'll try to get around to answering those. And in the meantime, check out our sponsor, which is sc2replaystats.com. They have a really cool site that will analyze your replays for you. You can automatically upload it to their site. Really cool stuff going on there, so check that out. But in the meantime, the last composition video we'll see for the Zerg is ZvZ, and that'll be a very interesting video as well. So check that out. Should be coming in the near future.